Junk Food Dinner 352. This week we pay tribute to the king of the monsters, Godzilla. Godzilla returns to destroy Japan and another monster in Godzilla Raids Again. Time-traveling robots spark another Godzilla attack in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. And last, it's kaiju versus mutants versus space aliens in Godzilla Final Wars.
Take that, you dinosaur!
Let's see, the first movie on this Godzilla-themed show is Godzilla Raids Again. This is from 1955. This is the second Godzilla movie. I chose this movie because, I chose Shin Godzilla, but it's not out. But this was my backup movie because the last time we did a Godzilla-themed show, we did the very first Godzilla, which is by far my favorite Godzilla. I like the kind of seriousness and the metaphor for war, especially atomic war.
We should say the original Japanese Gojira, which is a starkly different movie than the American Godzilla King of the Monsters.
What is Godzilla King of the Monsters?
It's the re-edited first movie, but with a bunch of shit with Raymond Burr to like Americanize it, and it really plays down the whole war metaphor because, you know, it was trying to sell to an audience that was being depicted as the enemy.
Yeah, so, like half the movie is just in that newsroom or whatever.
It's severely watered down. But that's the version of Godzilla that most people in America know, because the Japanese version that we watched on the podcast was not available in the United States for many years, up until, within the last couple decades.
And this one, did this one have a similar American re-edit or no?
It did, not to the same extent. I mean, it came out in Japan in 1955. It didn't come to the United States until 4 years later in 1959, where it was rebranded, not even as a Godzilla movie. It was retitled Gigantis, the Fire Monster. And in the movie, I watched the English cut of the movie this week for the show because I had seen the Japanese version, and they referred to Godzilla as Gigantis the whole time. I don't know if they were just trying to like sell it as like a new movie because they certainly didn't promote it as the sequel to the original Godzilla. And
even though he looks pretty much identical. I mean, there's always small changes, but there's very few changes between the first Godzilla design and this one.
Yeah, but they didn't insert like any American actors or anything like that. They told it as a story from Japan. I mean, there's some, questionable, accents and stereotypes in the overdubbing, but at least they kept it, wholly Japanese for the most part.
Okay. This is a movie that picks up right where the first one leaves off, except for the fact that there's now a new Godzilla, because in the first one, Godzilla dies, spoiler alert, and this surprises absolutely nobody. Everybody thinks it's just perfectly reasonable that there's a new Godzilla.
But the other thing that's weird about it is like at the beginning of the movie, they have to show these guys film of the first Godzilla. Like, I saw something like this happen. And like, I know this was the 50s and, maybe news didn't travel as fast as it does today, but I would think in Osaka, Japan, you would have heard about Godzilla happening in Tokyo at this point.
A couple hours away. Yeah. I think you would have noticed.
Right.
Yeah. And the way that, the guy's like, I've heard about this before, and like they show some news footage. So for about 3 or 4 very long minutes, you're just watching completely silent, a room of completely silent men watch this completely silent news footage reel of Godzilla from the first movie.
Which is just footage from the first movie.
Yeah.
But in worse quality because it's being projected on like 8mm film or something.
Yeah, it's really weird. So these like army dudes or whatever, like they're stranded on this island and they see Godzilla fighting another monster. They get back to the mainland. They let everybody know. Nobody's surprised that Godzilla lives again. And they say that this is a different Godzilla. And so I had one question. Not being very familiar with Godzilla outside of the like 6 we've done for the show, is this a thing that happens a lot? Like, are there a lot of different Godzillas, or from here on out, is there just the one Godzilla? Like, what is this?
Yeah, so as we'll talk about when we get into Godzilla Final Wars, there have been many attempts to be the last Godzilla movie. Like every time there's like a 10-year anniversary or whatever, they'll come out with a Godzilla. They'll say it's the last one. In many of them, he dies. So it only stands to reason a lot of times when they have a new one that it's a new Godzilla. But it doesn't matter. I mean, the more you think about it, like there's 30 movies spanning several decades. The continuity is not something you should really consider when it comes to Godzilla at all.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that makes things a little easier.
For all you know, this Godzilla could be somebody that was sent back in time from Final Wars. I mean, like the continuity is so weird.
That's true. So we've got this new Godzilla, and we now have a new monster, which looks kind of like an ankylosaur, which is my favorite dinosaur, but a lot pointier. And this thing is not a mutant. I think it's just a dinosaur, whereas they say in this one that Godzilla is a mutated dinosaur. Do I have that right?
Yes, and they expand upon that in Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, which we'll talk about after this.
Yeah, which I think is real weird to go ahead and say that, especially when they get into the Ghidorah movie, but like to say, like, I know a lot of people were angry when the American one came out and they said that Godzilla was a mutated iguana, but like that makes it a little bit more sense than being a mutated dinosaur on account of like dinosaurs don't exist. But so I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, like these movies just kind of take it on faith that dinosaurs just are kind of alive from time to time. Which is kind of cool and interesting. Also they drop this weird kind of like Star Wars movie logic when they're at this boardroom meeting about Godzilla, where the thing that killed Godzilla in the first one, which is called like the oxygen destroyer or something, they say that all information about that has been lost. Like, which is kind of like what they do in Star Wars, where it's like every time like time passes between Star Wars movies, like everybody forgets everything. Like they're just like, oh, Jedis, what are those? I don't know. Luke Skywalker, who's that? So in the 3 months since the last Godzilla movie, they completely forgot how to make this weapon that saved all of humanity from a Godzilla.
But I mean, at least they do address it in the plot where they're like, oh yeah, we forgot how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's
And again, if you watch enough Godzilla movies, that is a reoccurring theme because continuity is out the window, because if you want to have any sort of through line through these movies, you'd have to believe that the Japanese people have figured out and forgotten how to defeat Godzilla and various other monsters time and time again.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of like what they do in the Freddy movies, where everybody has, like Jason, like you have to kind of come up with new ways to kill these monsters over and over, and you're not allowed to tell anybody how to do it so that they can do it in the next movie. But
right.
But yeah, so this movie kind of starts out a little bit slow. Although we get some cool scenes of Godzilla at the beginning, and then they show up, and then everybody just kind of waits for Godzilla and the new guy to show up in Japan to fight, like to get all, like they evacuate cities and stuff, which I like that stuff. Like I like that it is still kind of, even though they're introducing another monster for him to fight, like it's still treated like a real threat the way that it is in the first one, where people have to evacuate, and it kind of evokes wartime imagery of people leaving their homes and refugees and stuff like this, which I thought was cool. And then the monster fight happens, which is fucking awesome. I like that the new monster that Godzilla is fighting is 4-legged, but it's still a dude in a suit, so it kind of looks weird and surreal. Like I think that's super cool.
Yeah.
Also, I was really surprised that only this being the first sequel, and Godzilla is already fighting other monsters. Like there being 30 of these things, Like, if someone would have made me guess when a second monster shows up in the franchise, I probably would have guessed, like, part 5 or 6 or something, but pretty immediately, he's already fighting other monsters. So it was, I guess it's pretty cool that they knew, you know, how this franchise was going to go so early. During the big fights between the two monsters, like, there'll be these things where, like, they're kind of grappling around, and, like, Godzilla keeps, like, squaring up with his dukes, which I thought was kind of weird. But while they fight, like, they do this thing where, like, dirt gets kicked up into the air, and I thought that was, like, a super cool effect.
Yeah.
Like, big plumes of dust and dirt go up. And then the fight's over. Godzilla is victorious. And I was like, man, this was a cool Godzilla movie. I don't know why everybody kept telling me this was, like, one of the worst ones. And then I looked down and I realized that there was still 45 minutes left. And the rest of the 45 minutes sucked. So, So I don't know. Kind of an okay one, but I don't. It's like they came up with, like, a good movie and then realized it was only 45 minutes long, and then just kind of fucked around for the rest of it to make it feature length. But I don't know. Could have been worse. What do you guys think about this one?
Yeah, I feel like I may have tried to undersell it to you. I didn't think you would like this one at all. It is, a lot of people do consider it one of the worst Godzilla movies, only for the fact that, I mean, there's a lot of people that love it in the Godzilla world, but there are a lot of people that does have its detractors. I think the main thing that people have against this movie is that it was rushed to production. It was made, it literally hit theaters within 6 months in Japan of the debut of the first Gojira movie. So they fucking rushed this thing. Apparently they were kind of taken by surprise of how successful the first Godzilla movie was, and they the president of Toho was like, we're making another one of these right fucking now. And so within 6 months they had this thing shot, edited, and on the screen. And I think it definitely shows it. I mean, after coming off, like you said, like the stark and, you know, dark nature of the original one, this definitely feels less heavy and weighty in its appearance. And Godzilla himself is even, like, you know, there was less care taken to kind of show the scale, and, you know, I don't know, it feels a little cheesier and cornier and cheaper. But, you know, like you said, it does introduce a lot of things that would become staples of the Godzilla franchises, where it's him battling another monster. And again, you know, I think that can be good or bad. I think it takes away the serious nature of the first movie to have these kind of monster battles, but then that also became a touchstone of the series. So, you know, I think that was great. It's the only other movie besides the first one that's black and white, which I think is cool. I think Godzilla looks very cool in black and white. Mm-hmm. I think maybe some of the next entries in the series probably could have benefited by remaining in black and white. And after this movie, they took quite a break. They took 7 years before they made another one. So, you know, and the next one was Godzilla versus King Kong. So I think they definitely knew that they rushed this one, and they wanted to take their time with the next one, although King Kong versus Godzilla is not a masterpiece by any means either. But yeah, so I think this is fun. I like Parker mentioned, I think there is a lot of boring stuff in this. They pad out the runtime quite a bit with a lot of the human stories. I mean, there's these stories of these pilots, and they, you know, there's like these love interests between the two pilots. There's, you know, conflict between the two of them, and all that stuff is okay, especially for like a 50s sci-fi movie. It's you know, pretty decent, but it does get pretty boring, and there is a lot of it. In between the Godzilla stuff, they really pad out the runtime, even though it's a fairly short runtime, you know, only, you know, less than 90 minutes. Only a small percentage of it is Godzilla time, so that can get a little tiresome. But that being said, I do like this. There are some really bad shots in this. There's a shot that's notorious in this movie where Godzilla is, you know, it's towards the end when Godzilla is at the South Pole or wherever, and there's an overhead shot of a plane, and it's literally just a Godzilla figure standing still, not moving whatsoever. And people make fun of that all the time. But
apparently it was supposed to be moving, but the effect broke or something. So it's just this dumb toy.
Yeah, it just looks like a toy standing on a set. So, so overall, it's definitely got its flaws. But it, like I said, it did kick off, the kind of the pattern for what a lot of the next Godzilla movies would be. So for that, I like it. And because it's black and white, I think if you like 50s black and white sci-fi movies and the first Godzilla, don't expect, equal to the first. But if in the same vein, I think it's a good time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you pretty much with what you've said. I think you did undersell this initially when we first talked about it, because I hadn't seen this one before and I was kind of preparing for the worst. But I also enjoyed my time watching this movie. It's probably a second tier Godzilla movie. I think the villain in this, the foe for Godzilla, is not the most memorable. He's no King Caesar.
Anguirus, by the way.
Anguirus, yeah. Also kind of a weird, lame name. It's like, I get it. He's angry. He's a monster. Of course he's angry. Osaka is kind of a step down from Tokyo, and all these
right.
things. But this is one of those. It's a kind of an interesting point in the Godzilla mythos, right? Because this is where they start to develop, like, what are the traditions of a Godzilla movie, and what can we expect from a Godzilla movie going forward? And it's cool to see all that, and definitely agree that the black and white photography is nice. And I think I like to see Godzilla in black and white. I would almost like to see a modern Godzilla movie made in black and white. I think the character looks really cool and really imposing in black and white. And if you're thinking of Godzilla as like an allegory for World War II, it kind of looks appropriate in black and white. Like that's kind of like how I envision that time period.
Yeah.
And he's pretty mean looking in this. He's got those goofy teeth that he kind of had early on. Where it looks like maybe he should have went to the kaiju dentist a little bit more often. But I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, they slimmed down the suit. Like they kept, because it was rushed to production. They, obviously reused a lot of the suits and stuff from the first one, but they did slim it down significantly, because I guess one of the biggest complaints of the guy in the suit in the first one, the suit was so fucking heavy that he could barely do anything. So they trimmed it down, but as a result, it does look a little cheaper, especially when, there's movement in the limbs. You can see the rubber really folding where you didn't really see that in the first one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right that they screwed up the scale sometimes. Like there's a scene where he like falls off of a cliff, and it's pretty obvious that it's not a very big cliff, and it's just like a 5 foot tall man. So that stuff can be a little bit weird. But I do think that there are other parts of this that are technically done really well. Like the music is great. The score here is by a guy, Masaru Sato, who did over 250 film scores in Japan, including 15 for Kurosawa. And a number of Godzilla movies, and I think the score is great. It's like very slow and droning and kind of minimal, but like that scene where Godzilla is coming out of the ocean, I thought the music was super creepy. So, I like that. I agree that the humans can be the downside of this movie and probably every Godzilla movie, but there are some things in this. And most
50 sci-fi movies too.
Yeah, for sure. But, I think there are some things in this that reflect the times. And, like you have characters in this kind of worrying about how Tokyo is going to be rebuilt. And you can definitely feel some of that like post-war anxiety that I'm sure was definitely present in their society, even leading into the 50s. So that's cool. For me, I mean, the main attraction for any of these Godzilla movies is the rubber monster battles. And they're pretty good in this. Like even in a semi-lame movie, where like, it's clear that they rush things. There's just such like a pure pleasure in watching two rubber suited dudes smack each other around, and I don't know. It kind of reminds me of pro wrestling in that way, where it just appeals to like some kind of primal instinct, even when it's like super silly and ridiculous. I don't know. It gets me excited. It's like almost like a very American sort of entertainment, like monster trucks or something. So,
yeah.
I think that's cool. And I love those scenes in this. And, anytime my attention drifted slightly As soon as I got back to the giant rubber lizard monster battles, like I was on board. I mean, what else is there in the world that's better than two kaiju fighting on screen? So, even if it was like in slight fast motion, which I thought was kind of weird, which I guess was another accident.
Weird,
yeah,
right.
Like an accident during production that they later claimed, oh, we liked this accident. But I don't know that fast motion really works too well.
No, it's like fucking Benny Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also, watching this in high def this week, I watched, I think, a copy from the Blu-ray. You can like very clearly see that everything is models, and I'm sure back in the day on television you could even tell that they were models, but you can really see that these are like toy cars instead of real cars. And as soon as you see a toy car on screen, like that car is going to get smashed. Like it's a toy car for a reason. But again, like similar to stop motion, there's almost something that I like about that you can see the seams. And it reminds me of like, at this point in time in the mid 50s, if you were in a place like Burbank, California, and you went to some kid's backyard, it's probably a good chance that kid is in his backyard effectively making his own little Godzilla movie, like playing with little monster toys. Maybe if he's lucky, he might be, filming it on like a Super 8 camera. Kids like Tim Burton were effectively making these own little kaiju movies of their own at this time. So, I like this world. I like this kind of universe where guys could get together with, basically a slightly bigger budget version of what they would have been doing as kids in their own backyards and throw together something fun like this. And it is fun. You can sense that sense of craft. And yeah, it's rushed, but for a movie that was put together in 6 months' time, that there are a lot of guys that put in a ton of overtime to make this a reality. And that only happens when people are passionate and they care about the project. And even if it's a little bit rough around the edges, I mean, I think you can see a lot of passion in this movie and in a lot of the better Godzilla movies. So, for that alone, I think this is worth, commendation. Takashi Shimura is also in this. He was one of the lead like scientist dudes from the first Godzilla movie, also in a bunch of Kurosawa movies. And it's cool to see him in this, even if it looks like he barely wants to be in it and is kind of only briefly in it. It's still always cool to see like a legitimate, like award-winning actor show up in a schlocky sci-fi or horror movie. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that's fun in Godzilla Raids Again. And yeah, I'm pretty glad that we watched it.
Well, hell yeah. Yeah. All right. We're all glad that we watched it. That sums it up for Godzilla Raids Again. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about Godzilla versus 3 of the fakest bats we've ever seen on the show.
And we've seen some fake-ass bats, man.
Thanks for visiting the JFD video store. We hope you enjoyed our burning hot takes on this week's selected movie. Check us out on iTunes or junkfooddinner.com for full episodes. The audio version contains 3 full-length reviews per week, topical news segments, and listener feedback. Great for long commutes, exercise, or surviving the impending apocalypse. Thanks to Chuck Linnington for the on-screen artwork. Email jfdpodcast@gmail.com or check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, or whatever else is going on. We're probably there and wanna hear from you. Until next time, keep washing them dishes.
You know, Parker, I thought you knew better than get involved.